1 minute ago, Diddy's mom confesses dark truth. Courtroom left, Gasping, New York City, 2025. The press gathered early outside the federal courthouse as the nation braced for what was already being called the most closely watched trial in recent entertainment history. It wasn't just a legal proceeding against Sean "Diddy" Combs. It had become something deeper, an excavation of power, family, and complicity. But the first shock didn't come from prosecutors or witnesses. It came from someone long thought to be silent: his mother. Janice Combs had stayed out of the public eye for years. She was the ever-present figure in the background of red carpets and award speeches, the woman credited for shaping her son, but never stepping into the spotlight. That changed the moment she walked through the courthouse doors and made a statement that would upend the entire narrative. She didn't plead for his innocence. She didn't attack the accusers. She simply said, "I warned him." The phrase detonated across headlines, social media, and television newsrooms. It was as if the trial had instantly morphed from a prosecution into a parable of moral failure. In her written statement delivered to the press by her legal team, Janice did not offer a defense of her son. Instead, she revealed that she had known enough to worry and chose silence. "There were times I felt uneasy," she wrote. "Nights I couldn't sleep. Things I saw, things I overheard. I warned Sean. But he didn't listen." The message was clear. This wasn't a mother in denial. This was a mother who had seen too much, stayed quiet too long, and was now trying to reclaim something: her voice, her truth, or maybe even her soul. Within hours, her words had gone viral. The quote, "I saw things the world didn't see and I warned him," was reshared millions of times. Commentators across the political and cultural spectrum debated whether Janice was offering a thinly veiled confession, a desperate plea, or a long overdue act of courage. Analysts picked apart the nuances of her phrasing. "This is not a denial," one prosecutor noted on national television. "It's a deflection. It pulls attention away from the facts and onto the feelings." And that may be exactly what makes it so dangerous. But Janice's statement did more than evoke emotion. It altered the trajectory of the case. Until then, the public had focused almost exclusively on the allegations and the evidence. Now they were looking at the silences, the bystanders, the enablers. And that brought them back to one night in 2003, a private party at a mansion in Miami. Janice attended early in the evening. Witnesses said she arrived with a friend and left without saying goodbye. At the time, it barely registered. But now a single page from a 2017 diary turned that moment into a potential turning point. Those girls were too young. They were scared. Nobody said anything. If what she did was real, I failed. The handwriting matched Janice's. The date aligned with an industry event hosted by Combs' label. Investigators confirmed the journal was turned over voluntarily. It wasn't proof, but it was damning in implication. Janice had become more than a peripheral figure. Her words and memories were now central to a story unraveling decades of silence. Her closed-door meeting with prosecutors added fuel to the fire. Sources confirmed she spoke about her son's financial control over her life, her home, her travel, her income, all tied to his empire. She had tried to speak out once, she said. The response was swift. "You talk, we cut you off." So she stayed quiet, until she couldn't anymore. The emotional dam finally broke after a recorded jailhouse phone call between Diddy and his mother was reviewed by federal investigators. The transcript, later confirmed by multiple sources, stunned even seasoned legal observers. "You built this, Sean. Now watch it burn. Don't start with this, Mom. I need your help, not your judgment. Even God's looking away now. You think you know what's going on? You don't know anything. I told them everything. I had to." The phrase "I told them everything" was repeated again and again by commentators and prosecutors alike. What had she shared with whom? Was she now a cooperating witness or something even more volatile? A mother seeking redemption at the cost of her son's legacy. For years, Janice had been viewed as a passive figure, a grieving wife turned supportive mother. but now she stood at the center of a legal, emotional, and cultural reckoning. Her decision to speak out, however late, cast a shadow over every assistant, every guard, every business partner who had said nothing. This was no longer just about Diddy. It was about the machine that sustained him, the silence that protected him, and the mother who finally chose to speak. At the trial, a new question began to take shape. Not just what did Diddy do, but what did everyone else allow to happen? When Janice takes the stand, she may not have all the answers, but for the first time, the world will hear her ask the questions out loud. From the outside, the transformation had been astonishing. Sean Combs had evolved from a street-smart music producer into a billion-dollar brand. Bad Boy Records, fashion labels, vodka lines, reality shows. There was nothing he couldn't touch, but for those close to him, including his mother, there were signs that something darker was growing behind the empire. In 2005, Janice Combs abruptly stepped back from the public eye. No more red carpet appearances, no more birthday tributes, no more gala interviews describing how proud she was. To most observers, it seemed like a graceful exit from the chaos of celebrity. But according to those who worked inside Combs Enterprises, it was something else entirely. A former executive assistant who requested anonymity recalled a strange shift in atmosphere around that time. Janice had once been a daily presence in the office, bringing warmth to an otherwise cold operation. Then she vanished. She came in one day and just looked broken. She didn't say much. Walked into the conference room, looked around like she was seeing something no one else saw, then left. After that, she was gone. In retrospect, that silence now reads like fear. One source from Bad Boy's security team said Janice had raised concerns about a party in late 2004. Not about her son directly, but about the people he surrounded himself with. About the secrecy, about the girls. Nothing she said was officially recorded. But her behavior changed, and she withdrew. Another clue emerged from a canceled project in 2011. Janice had been working with a ghostwriter on a memoir. Early drafts described her life as a single mother in Harlem, her journey through grief and ambition, and her pride in raising a boy who beat the odds. But according to insiders, the tone shifted midway. She began writing about a house in Miami, about a girl who looked terrified, and about a warning unheeded. The project was killed. The publishing house never received a final manuscript, and the ghostwriter disappeared from public view. By the time the federal investigation into Combs was gaining traction in the 2020s, Janice was living almost entirely out of sight. A luxury estate in New Jersey paid for by Combs Enterprises. Monthly disbursements labeled as consulting support. But she rarely went out, and when she did, it was always alone. That seclusion was shattered by the trial. Cassie Ventura's testimony did more than allege years of manipulation. It also placed Janice at the scene of at least one event that prosecutors believe could be classified as criminal facilitation. Cassie claimed Janice had been present during a 2003 gathering where underage girls were allegedly moved between rooms in a state of fear. While Cassie never claimed Janice participated, the implication was clear. She saw, and she said nothing. For days after the media speculated, where was Janice? Would she respond? Could she? Then came the phone call. The jailhouse exchange between mother and son painted a portrait not of a family in distress, but of a family at war. Janice's words cut deeper than any prosecutor's argument. Her disappointment was not theatrical, it was surgical. And in saying, "I told them everything," she did more than confess. She exposed her own complicity and her decision to break free from it. Prosecutors seized on the moment. Within 72 hours, they subpoenaed personal documents, email archives, and journals from Janice's New Jersey residence. What they found was not a smoking gun, but a slow, smoldering realization. In one handwritten note dated August 2017, Janice had scrawled a list of names, followed by this line: "She told me about the tunnels. I thought she was exaggerating, I don't think so anymore. Beside it, another entry. Nobody asks why they were so quiet. It's not trauma, it's terror. Those diary pages, according to a source close to the legal team, are now part of a growing body of circumstantial evidence that paints a chilling pattern of behavior, not just by Diddy, but by the people who enabled him, the people who benefited, the people who knew. One prosecutor privately said, "This trial might not come down to what he did. It might come down to what she knew, and when." It was an ironic reversal. For decades, Diddy had dominated headlines. Now it was Janice's silence, and her decision to end it, that could define the outcome. In the aftermath of her phone call, Janice reportedly agreed to sit for a confidential deposition. Her legal team insisted it would not be used for public consumption. But prosecutors have not ruled out introducing excerpts if her testimony proves relevant to the timeline. The pressure mounted, and the public response was split. Some saw Janice as brave, a mother finally freeing herself from the burden of complicity. Others saw her as cowardly, too late to matter, too afraid to speak until the empire was already collapsing. One commentator on national television asked the question now echoing through every news cycle: why now? The answer perhaps lay not in guilt, but in grief, the kind that lingers for years, buried beneath luxury and silence, the kind that erupts when you see a version of your child that no longer resembles the person you raised. Janice had always believed in redemption. She prayed for it, but by the time she finally spoke, redemption was no longer a gift she could offer. It had become something she had to earn. The third week of the trial began with heightened security. Protesters flanked the courthouse steps. Fans held up posters, some in support of Diddy, others demanding justice. But inside the courtroom, it wasn't the noise that mattered. It was the silence, a silence heavy with anticipation. The prosecution was ready to introduce new witnesses, not public figures or celebrities, former insiders, people who had worked in the background in logistics, transportation, party planning, and personal staffing. They were the ones who moved the gears behind the scenes, and now, one by one, they were stepping forward. Among them was a woman listed only as Witness E, a former operations coordinator at Combs Miami estate. Her voice, low and deliberate, echoed across the courtroom. We were told to never ask questions, just follow instructions. There were zones, red zones. Guests didn't go there. Staff didn't go there unless specifically told. And if something seemed wrong, you looked the other way. The term red zones became a motif repeated throughout the next 3 days. According to multiple witnesses, these were areas within various properties. New York, Los Angeles, and Miami restricted even from senior staff. Another witness, a former private driver, detailed pickups that involved dropping off women at parties, but being told not to speak to them. I once saw a girl crying in the back seat. She couldn't have been older than 18. I asked her if she was okay. She said, "Just get me there." The defense team objected frequently, calling the testimony hearsay and speculative, but the prosecution argued that the environment described was not incidental. It was institutional. It spoke to culture, to structure, and to a pattern of concealment. Then came the diary. The prosecution introduced excerpts from Janice Combs' 2017 journal, recently authenticated by forensic specialists. On day 11 of the trial, portions were read aloud. The courtroom fell silent. She had too many people under her. No one could tell the truth. Me too. I failed. Another entry. I tried once. They told me it would all collapse, that I would lose everything. And maybe I deserved to, but I couldn't. I just couldn't. The courtroom held its breath. The phrase "they told me it would all collapse" wasn't just emotionally devastating. It was legally significant. The prosecution argued it pointed to coercion, to obstruction, to the calculated silencing of dissent. One of the government attorneys leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't just a failure of morality. This was a machine, one that demanded silence, loyalty, and complicity, even from a mother." The statement struck deep, but what came next redefined the stakes. A new recording, never before played in court. A voicemail from Janice to an unidentified family friend, dated early 2018. "I don't know who to trust anymore. I'm scared for what I know. If I disappear, it's not an accident." The audio was scratchy, the voice unmistakable. Prosecutors framed it as evidence of a larger intimidation network, one that extended beyond staff and into family. The defense fired back. They accused prosecutors of building a case on paranoia and regret. They argued Janice was projecting guilt, not proving abuse. But the jury was listening, and the public was watching. The press turned its attention to former employees who had previously signed non-disclosure agreements. At least 3 were reportedly seeking legal avenues to speak, citing duress and misrepresentation. The wall of silence was cracking. Then a surprise twist. A second journal, this one older, dated 2009. It had not been part of the initial subpoena. A housekeeper found it in a sealed storage box labeled Melvin's Things, a reference to Janice's late husband. It contained entries about Sean's early career, the parties, and one unsettling phrase, "He's slipping into something I can't recognize. The lights are too bright, the girls are too young, and the power, it changes people." The judge called a recess. The courtroom emptied in stunned silence. Outside, the press swarmed. What began as a trial about specific allegations had transformed. Now it was a generational reckoning, a cautionary tale about unchecked influence, about the price of silence, and about what it costs a mother to finally speak. The prosecution rested with one final exhibit, a photograph. Janice standing at the back of a party in Miami, her face turned away from the camera. Behind her, blurred in the background, a hallway, a girl, barefoot. No one said a word as the image was projected. The moment spoke for itself. By the 4th week, what was once a celebrity trial had become a public dissection of systemic secrecy and familial fracture. But the prosecution wasn't finished. After laying out months of patterns, testimonies, diaries, and veiled threats, they pivoted sharply. The target was no longer just Sean Combs, it was the myth he had built. The court's mood shifted when Janice Combs herself was called in for a private deposition. Although the testimony was sealed, leaks were inevitable, and what emerged shocked even the most cynical observers. According to sources familiar with the transcript, Janice confirmed for the first time that she witnessed behavior consistent with what the prosecution called coercive control. She admitted to seeing signs of fear in the eyes of certain women, whispered conversations among staff, rules enforced without explanation. She did not claim to witness abuse directly, but she did something perhaps more powerful. She acknowledged the environment. It wasn't just the silence. It was how normal the silence became, she reportedly said. "That's when I knew something was very wrong." Her words were dissected by analysts as the clearest acknowledgement yet that the culture inside Combs Enterprises was engineered for secrecy. The defense argued that Janice's statement was speculative and emotionally manipulated. They called it the interpretation of a mother in crisis, not the testimony of a credible witness. But their rebuttal lacked punch, and worse for them, the next witness brought hard evidence. A former IT manager presented emails and internal memos, dated from 2013 to 2016. Some were innocuous logistics scheduling party themes, others less so. One flagged correspondence between senior security staff about pre-party screenings. Girls approved, ID confirmed, ready for movement to red zone. Do not engage. The defense scrambled to contextualize the language. They claimed it referred to exclusive VIP areas and background checks for safety, but the prosecution countered with internal HR complaints. One former employee had written, "Culture of compliance, bourgeoisie, culture of fear. I've raised issues, no response. I'm afraid to escalate." The jury was growing restless, and the cracks in Diddy's wall were now visible to everyone. The biggest fracture came the next morning. Cassie Ventura returned to the stand, Her second testimony was brief, only 32 minutes, but it was strategic. She described an interaction in 2015 where Janice saw her bruised arm and asked what happened. Cassie claimed she started to speak, but Janice held up a hand. Not here. Not like this. It was a small moment, but it carried the weight of history. Janice had seen, had guessed, but she walked away. As the press debated what that meant, an unlikely figure took center stage, a former family therapist. Subpoenaed after records showed she had counseled both Janice and Sean separately during the early 2010s. Her testimony was clinical but damning. Janice often expressed feeling helpless. She described emotional coercion. There were indications that she feared not just reputational damage, but real-world consequences if she intervened. She was stuck between being a mother and being part of the machine. And then came the turning point no one predicted. Janice returned, not to the stand, not to speak, but to sit in the front row. For the first time since her statement, she attended a full day of court. Her presence silenced the room. Sean looked at her. She didn't look back. The tension between them was palpable. A son facing charges, a mother confronting the price of decades of silence. And then the gallery gasped. A new witness, a former associate of DIDDY'S from the earliest Bad Boy Records days, was sworn in. He had been quiet for years. He had left the industry, disappeared, but now he was back. He described a Miami weekend in 2003, a party, a girl who wanted to leave, doors locked, staff nervous, and Janice standing at the top of the stairs watching. She saw the whole thing, he said. She didn't say anything, but she saw. The room went silent. Prosecutors didn't need to say more. The message was clear. Janice's silence had weight, and now her presence had power. As the prosecution prepared for closing arguments, the question wasn't just whether Sean Combs would be convicted. It was whether the people who had protected him out of fear, love, or complicity could ever be seen the same way again. The fifth week of the trial began with the media camped outside the courthouse before sunrise. News vans lined the blocks. Journalists staked out positions hoping for even a glimpse of Janice Combs. Inside, federal agents moved quietly through the hallways. The tension wasn't only legal now, it was cultural, emotional, symbolic. For the first time, the court permitted the prosecution to play a full recording of the now infamous jailhouse call between Sean and his mother. "I told you this would happen," Janice said in a soft but firm voice. "You don't know what you're talking about," Sean snapped. "I saw it, Sean. I warned you. I begged you. You think you're better than me? You lived off it too. I thought money would save me. It didn't." The recording stunned the courtroom. There was no denial, no attempt to reframe. It was raw confession masquerading as confrontation. More powerful than any testimony was the sound of a mother and son coming undone in real time. Then came the letters. Prosecutors unveiled a series of handwritten notes recovered from Janice's home. One in particular stood out. It was written to a friend, but never sent. "I prayed he would stop. I told myself maybe it wasn't what it looked like, but it was. It was exactly what it looked like." The prosecution's closing arguments built to a crescendo, not with anger, but precision. They laid out a timeline showing Janice's involvement, or rather her presence at key events. At least 5 parties, 3 separate private residences, 1 secluded trip to Turks and Caicos. She never said a word, but her silence wasn't empty. It was strategic, calculated, painful. She was the first to know, the lead prosecutor said, and perhaps the last to speak. But in her words finally spoken, we find the truth. Janice wasn't the only one facing that truth. A string of former executives began issuing public apologies. One admitted to knowing about hush payments. Another confessed to managing staff specifically trained not to ask questions. Combs' empire wasn't crumbling. It was imploding. The defense was unrelenting. They claimed Janice was being weaponized against her own son. They painted her as vulnerable, manipulated, confused, but it didn't land. In the jury box, no one looked convinced. Outside, a cultural shift was underway. Journalists began to refer to Janice not just as a witness, but as a symbol, the woman who saw, suffered, and eventually spoke. Editorials split. Was she brave or simply late? Was she a victim or an accomplice? The public wasn't looking for purity. They were looking for accountability, and Janice at long last gave it. As the jury deliberated, media outlets played montages of Janice over the years, smiling beside Sean at award shows, standing in the background during music videos, waving gently from luxury balconies, all while perhaps holding a secret. Then came one final revelation. In sealed court documents, a forensic accountant presented financial records that tied Janice's estate house cars, even groceries, to an internal bad boy discretionary fund, labeled legacy support. She wasn't just supported by Sean. She was financially integrated into the empire, and still she turned. In a final statement issued through her legal counsel, Janice said, "I stayed silent because I believed I had no other choice. Now I know silence is a choice, and I refuse to make it again." The court fell quiet, not in judgment, but in awe of the complexity. This wasn't a story of betrayal. It was one of awakening, of a woman who stood by her son for decades and finally chose to stand for something else. The final day of the trial arrived with a rare stillness. New York, normally vibrating with noise and urgency, felt paused. The courthouse square was blanketed in overcast skies and quiet anticipation. Inside, the jury filed into their seats with the gravity of people who knew they were no longer just arbiters of guilt, but participants in a national moment. Sean Combs stood motionless, flanked by attorneys. Janice Combs sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap. She looked neither defiant nor broken, just resolved. The foreperson rose. "We, the jury in the matter of the United States versus Sean Combs, find the defendant." A pause. "Guilty on all counts." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Outside, camera crews scrambled to break the news. Inside, Sean's shoulders sank slightly, the only visible reaction. His legal team stared straight ahead. Janice didn't flinch. For a moment, no one moved. Then the judge spoke. "This court acknowledges the extraordinary circumstances of this case, the power structures revealed, the cultural significance. But ultimately, the law is clear, and no one stands above it." With that, the proceedings drew to a close. But the story wasn't over. In the days that followed, the impact spread far beyond the courtroom. Major sponsors began severing ties with Combs' business ventures. Streaming platforms quietly removed curated collections. Artists once associated with him issued cautious statements or remained silent altogether. Public reaction was intense and divisive. At vigils held by survivor advocacy groups, Janice's name was spoken alongside those who had found the courage to speak. Her transformation from loyal matriarch to reluctant whistleblower resonated with many who had endured their own journeys of silence. For others, she remained a controversial figure, someone who had known too much for too long. But the most potent consequence came in the form of testimony. Janice Combs, no longer a defendant, no longer a silent figure, sat for an exclusive federal interview. Portions of that deposition, heavily redacted, were later made available as part of a Senate hearing on entertainment industry accountability. In it, she described the environment of control, not just around Sean, but around herself. "I couldn't move without it being approved. I couldn't speak without feeling like I might cause collapse." The more powerful he became, the less room there was for anyone else's truth. When asked why she finally spoke up, she replied, "Because I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself anymore. I raised a child. I didn't raise a king." That statement became a lightning rod for debate. Some praised her candor. Others said it came too late. But in a culture starving for accountability, her words resonated. Publications shifted their tone. No longer framed as merely a mother caught in the crossfire, Janice was seen as someone who had the opportunity to reframe the meaning of complicity and the courage to do so. She declined interviews, no memoirs, no documentaries, just silence, this time chosen. Behind the scenes, federal investigations expanded. More former employees of Combs Enterprises came forward. Several cooperated in exchange for immunity. A wider network of financial and legal irregularities began to surface, including hidden payments and off-book security protocols. Allegations once whispered became formal complaints, with ongoing investigations launched across multiple jurisdictions. The cultural tide turned decisively. Institutions that had once celebrated Combs began re-examining their relationships. Universities rescinded honorary degrees. Awards once proudly displayed were boxed away. Editorial boards published formal retractions and apologies for years of uncritical coverage. The reckoning was not just legal, but cultural. In Harlem, where Janice once raised her son alone, a mural of Sean Combs was painted over. In its place, local artists created a new piece. A woman holding a child, behind her a storm, in front of her a mirror. Beneath it in bold letters, "Speak even if your voice shakes." The story ended not with applause, but with reflection. For decades, Janice Combs had been a shadow present, but unheard. When she finally spoke, she didn't absolve, she revealed. Not just her son's descent, but her own quiet unraveling. And in doing so, she reminded a watching nation that silence is not always neutral. Sometimes it's survival, other times it's betrayal, but at its most courageous, it becomes reckoning. Janice's reckoning came too late to stop the harm, but not too late to name it. And for a culture long built on image and protection, that naming was revolutionary. The verdict was final, but the real judgment had already begun. In one of her final public remarks, made in a written statement released through her attorney, Janice offered no excuses and no absolution. "I loved my son more than anything, but love is not blind. Love, if it means anything, must include the courage to speak, to confront, and to change. If my voice shakes, let it shake. I will never be silent again."